All right, here I am back again with a new lecture. We finally completed our user interface design lecture, and this lecture I promise will be much shorter. We might break it into 2 parts, but probably no more than that. This lecture, if you look in the syllabus, I think it says site maintenance and content management or something like that. It's actually on the schedule a couple of weeks ago, but that's all right. We are going to catch up to where we need to be, so don't worry about that, even though we're a little bit behind of where we might want to be in the syllabus at this point. It's not going to be an issue. So this lecture, I call it here in the lecture slides, Web Content Management, or WCM, Search Engine Optimization, or SEO, and backups, keeping your website current, relevant, and safe. And it's not enough to build a website and put some content out there. Content management is a huge thing. So we have to have a system typically to help us manage our web-based content. Otherwise, our information gets stale. We have old information stuck on our web pages. I was looking at a company the other day. I can probably show you this company. Let me pull up their website. I was looking at this company in relation to a business venture. And they have a nice, attractive website. And if I go to the About Us page, and I want to find information about this company, I can go down here, and this is a professional company that's competing for billion-dollar contracts with the federal government. And I go down here and I read through some of this text, and let me make that a little bigger for you. And I find the right spot here. This company was featured in Forbes Small Business Magazine in 2001, and they made a strategic decision. Notice this wording here. They made a strategic decision to narrow their focus to serving government agencies exclusively. So this is on their About Us page. A little later down in the same page, it tells me that the company has a business base that is 60% military and 40% civilian agencies. And when you see civilian agencies, it's not real clear in here, are those government agencies? And so I actually asked somebody from the company, and they said, no, 60% of our 40% of our business is non-government business. And I said, well, that's not what your website says. Your website says you serve government contracts exclusively. And they said, no, it says we serve 60% government and 40% civilian. I said, no, it says you serve 60% military and 40% civilian, which is, I see as civilian government. But even the employees of the company are confused by the information that's displayed in their website, in their About Us page. And then there were some other things here. Let me see if I can find some of the other things that were confusing. I might not remember them off the top of my head, but essentially when I asked employees of the company about the information on their About Us page, they said some of this was old content and was not up to date. And so they're pulling these statements from somewhere, maybe a database that's populating this page, but somehow they're getting old information mixed in with new information. And that's a bad thing typically when you're running a company. You don't want to do that. And so we avoid that by using a content management system that says, hey, you developed this content 6 years ago, it's probably out of date, you need to take it out of this web page. Maybe you set an expiration date when you develop the content and say, I want this content to automatically go away off of my web page when it's 2 years old, because now it's not current anymore. But be careful with that, because you might end up in a situation where if you don't write new content for your web page after 2 years, you have no content because all the old content went away. So the web content management platform is designed to make sure that we have current relevant content on our website. And this is just one example of where that might be used. And I'm not going to look for the others, but there were several others on that same website that were interesting. So generally, we're going to have a specialized set of tools that we use, a suite of tools, if you want to call it that, that allow us to do certain things on our website. Content management is not most appropriately done by techies. Techies don't do content. They do structure and design and things behind the scenes, but they're not good at keeping our changing content up to date. So you need content managers, and they're normally non-technical, and they may be marketing people, they may be graphics design people, they may be business managers, folks of that nature. Because they're non-technical people, you need to make sure that your content management suite is intuitive for those non-techie users. In order to do that, what we typically employ is what we call a WYSIWYG interface. That's how we pronounce that. It stands for what you see is what you get. So that's the acronym there. And so when a non-technical content developer looks at it, when they make a change, they see exactly how the change will look to a web page viewer. And so that helps them to make appropriate changes to the content and the look and feel of the website. We give them a limited set of privileges to change things. We don't allow them to change the theme of our website. We don't, we've adopted a corporate standard for how our web pages will look. We don't allow the content managers to change those things. We just allow them to edit or update the content that is displayed within our corporate standards for displaying the web page. When you make a change in a web content management system, you type it the way you want it to look, or you make it the way you change the font size or the colors or whatever you can change, make something bold, underline it, whatever you can do, you make those changes, and the suite of tools generates the actual HTML code and CSS. The user doesn't have to generate any of that code to change the content. So that's what we're after, and we call these, you might either see the acronym WCM or WCMS, either Web Content Management or Web Content Management System. Both pretty much the same thing. But you're going to use a suite of tools to do this process. Some of the more popular web content management suites, sites like, or products like WordPress or Drupal, DNN, which we'll be using for our e-commerce projects. It is a web content management system. There are literally hundreds of these products out on the market, but a lot of them are not very well known. One that you might hear about, and there's a lot of debate about whether it is a web content management system or not, I say it is. Other people would argue it's more of a traditional application than a web application, is Microsoft SharePoint. Microsoft SharePoint is used by millions of businesses. It's used to do document management, manage workflows, which we'll talk about in a minute, and things of that nature. When you use it, you use a web page interface to do everything you're going to do. And I contend that that makes it a web-based web content management platform. Other people say, yeah, but you don't use it off of somebody else's web server. You have to build your own web server and host it on your own web server. And that's true with the enterprise version of SharePoint. You have to run your own servers and host all the content locally. But I don't think that makes it not a web content management platform, because the end user interfaces with the system via a web interface. So it is a web content management platform, in my opinion. Two broad categories of suites, what we call an online suite and an offline suite. Online suites are generally used by smaller businesses, businesses that like to say they're more nimble, but in reality they're just not so big that a small change is likely to have a big impact on them. But in an online environment, as soon as we change something, anybody that accesses our web resources sees that change. And that can be a good thing if you're going for quick changes and you want that nimble response time. But in a large organization, in a big enterprise, that's typically a bad thing. You typically don't allow an individual to change content without going through a series of approvals before it actually gets published to your production website. And so larger organizations and enterprises, large enterprises, tend to use offline content management platforms where you pre-process all the content, and then they say, all right, we've approved 82 changes to our website that are going to go into effect Sunday night at midnight. And so you put them in a pre-processing queue, some manager approves them all, and then Sunday at midnight they suddenly become available, all the changes become available on the website. And you need that kind of functionality when you have a large corporation and you don't want somebody to inadvertently change content that portrays the organization in a bad light. So which is better, it just sort of depends on the size of your organization and your purposes. If you need to be a super fast response to changing events, you're probably going to do an online system. If a small delay in time is acceptable and you need more formal control and approvals to make sure your organization is protected, then you're probably going to use an offline system. But they're both used for editing web pages or managing content on web pages. Some of the tools, the actual individual functions, if you will, or tools that are available in your suite of WCM tools, you usually get some sort of search engine optimization tool. And we're going to talk a little later in this lecture, probably not today, but we're going to talk about what is search engine optimization and how it works. You get workflow management. So in a larger organization, you have a frontline worker that develops new content, or they develop a new document or something like that. Before we expose it to the public, it probably has to go to that worker's supervisor for a review and maybe some editing. And then maybe it goes to a business manager for final approval. And so a typical workflow is what we call the three-step process, where you have develop, review, and approve are the three phases of the workflow. And so we can assign people within a web content management system, we can assign people to be the developer and the reviewer and the approver. And so when the developer finishes developing something, they submit it in the system, and it creates a task for the reviewer. It says, hey, Jake submitted this new web page content. You need to review it. And then when the supervisor reviews it, then they say, okay, it's no good. And so they reject it, so it goes back to Jake, and Jake has to make some more edits. And then Jake makes some more edits, sends it to the supervisor says, okay, that looks good. I'll sign off on the review. They review it, it goes to the supervisor's boss, Mary, and Mary says, okay, I'm the business manager. I approve this. Let's go ahead and publish this to our website on Thursday evening. And so that's the way a workflow management system works. We provide access control. We say who is able to do what on our web page. One of the problems with the bigger web content management platforms is they provide a huge amount of control to end users. In some of these content management platforms, an end user can lock an administrator out of the work that they're doing. That's typically a bad thing, because now the low-level worker can hide things from people higher up in the organization. So we typically don't want to do that. But a lot of WCMs allow that. So that's something to think about, is who's going to control access. There's actually a kind of a funny story. Many years ago, General Michael Hayden, who was the director of the CIA and the NSA, and I think Deputy Director of National Security, he was asked in an interview what was the single biggest threat to information system security in an organization, and he said very simply, SharePoint. And what he was referring to is the nightmare of assigning permissions and allowing users to assign permissions to their own content. Microsoft wasn't very happy about that he made that comment publicly. He retracted the comment, so maybe that's not the biggest threat to our national security and our national information systems, but his point is well taken. If we allow end users to have too much control over the system, that's a huge security risk. So access control is great, but we need to make sure that the appointed administrators are the ones that ultimately have control. Document versioning. Some of you probably use Google Docs, and Google Docs supports document versioning. Some versions of Microsoft Office, Office 365, support document versioning, and other products. But versioning just means if I make a change and I decide I don't like the new version, I can revert back to an earlier version. Most content management platforms store every version of a document that you save. And so if you want to go back to an earlier version, that's great. So if Jake's developing content and I go, no, Jake, this is all wrong what you did, and I'm the supervisor, I can say, let's just go back to the previous version and start over with making edits. So it's an easy way to recover from a mistake in terms of developing content. And content management platforms have that functionality built in. They allow for a lot of collaboration. The kind of collaboration depends on the scope of the organization, typically. So if you're using Google Docs, you can be working on a document at the same time that somebody else in your group or Google group is working on the same document. And if you save things and the other person is editing the same sentence that you just edited at the same time, the changes you might make might be overwritten. If they save their change after yours, theirs is the latest change, that becomes the final version, and your edits get lost. That can be a bad thing. So typically in larger organizations, we use what we call a document checkout scheme. So you check the document out and say, I'm working on this particular document, nobody else edit it right now. And so nobody else can do anything with it until you check it back in. And if you check it out and you forget to check it in and you go home and you have another shift that comes on and somebody on that shift needs to edit it, there's usually an option for the supervisor to force the check-in of that document so that somebody else can work on it. But ideally, you would be responsible, and after you're finished making your edits, you would check it in so it's available to the next person that needs to edit it. But that's what we mean by collaboration features. We either let people edit the same document, and we do that, by the way. We allow them to edit the same document simultaneously because every person that opens a document actually gets their own personal virtual copy of the document. And then we use time information, system time information, to figure out which change supersedes which other change, and we construct the final version of the document. But while you have it open, you're not editing the actual stored document, you're editing a virtual copy of the document that's created just for you to edit. Content management platforms most of them support easy language translation. This doesn't mean you don't need somebody that's fluent in the language. It means that somebody who doesn't understand French can say, translate this page to French, and it'll display the text in French. But sometimes phrases and sayings in one language don't mean the same thing in another language. So you really need somebody that understands the language and the culture to review it and make sure that the translation is socially acceptable. Otherwise, bad things can happen. People can get offended by the way your website was translated. And lastly, web content management systems are very good because we can enforce our corporate standards for web page design. We write the CSS, we tell it what the web page looks like, it automatically generates for each page the CSS, and that way we can automatically, whatever content the good old Jake, whatever content he creates, when he submits it and it's approved, the CSS will automatically be applied to it, and it will display, no matter what Jake intended it to display like, it will automatically be displayed using our corporate approved standards. So that's a good thing about web content management. I'm going to go ahead and cut this lecture off here. I think I'm a little over an hour total between this and the last part of the user interface design lecture. So watch those two for Friday, and I'll be sending you some information on the NOCTI exams and the access codes for that in the not too distant future. And that's all.